Hey everyone, Temporal here, and today I want to talk about the fastest or most effective ways of breaking heavy DPS comps. What we've seen recently is there's a lot more quad DPS or triple poke DPS comp opens going on as a way to force the other team off of goats. Generally, this is a one-upsmanship maneuver where you force them off of goats, they go from goats to some form of dive, they either win that fight or you beat them with ults and they end up winning the next fight, at which point you swap to goats, beat their dive, they swap onto goats later, but it was still a successful maneuver because the team that started on quad DPS won a fight or two, got some distance or got some cap percentage, and then they were also the first team onto goats, which is a pretty big advantage when it comes to that goats mirror with the ult economy. So we've seen a lot of that recently, and because of that, I wanted to do a video about the fastest or most effective ways to break that quad DPS comp. So if they beat you, they one-upped you, you both opened on King of the Hill and they came out as quad DPS or whatever, and you go, okay, time to come back as dive, what is the most effective way to play into that quad DPS? And I actually have two comps that I really like for taking it down. The first comp is a comp that I've already done a video on, but I'm going to go over a little bit here anyways, which is Sombra Tracer Dive. Unlike in my previous video though, I'm going to go ahead and recommend a support line of Lucio Zen. Those are effective heroes for the comp, but the real reason that you're electing to go with that is those heroes will stay as those heroes when you do make that later transition into goats that we talked about. That's a nice little benefit there. But really what you're looking to do against quad DPS is very carefully take space from them with your tanks. Once you take space from them, it's very hard for quad DPS to take that space back. It tries to enforce the space it has with all of its heavy poke DPS with lots of good angles, but if you methodically take that space from them safely with pressure jumps from your Winston and with your D.Va supporting those, you can do quite nicely. And then as a separate pair, your Sombra can set up little hack one-click plays for your Tracer. So she can find a DPS, that can be the Hanzo, that can be the Widowmaker, anyone who's accessible. She can set up an unstealth hack, triple blink in from your Tracer, both of them will just one-clip delete them, and then recall and translocate out. And that's fine. Neither of your divers die in that situation. You killed someone off. Your tanks are meanwhile taking space to give you more area to stage from and to limit the sight lines that their poke DPS have on your supports. That works out just fine, and that's generally going to let you win the fight. Because once you get a couple picks, the quad DPS comp just collapses. Do be aware, you are playing into heavy ult, so you're going to be dealing with things like tack visors, dragon strikes. The one you really need to worry about is Widow Eyes. That's certainly a pain for the Sombra Tracer comp, but you can wait it out if you have to. That said, you're looking to win these as fast as possible without losing anyone so that you can force the game into its goats v goat state. The really nice thing about this comp is it transitions from a comp that beats heavy DPS comps to a pretty decent goats comps. It does that because of the support line that we talked about, and it also does that because it has Sombra, and EMP is one of the few ults that's worth holding as a transitional comp. So if you win the fight versus the heavy DPS comp, and that gives you EMP, not 60% of EMP, but actually gives you EMP, it can be worth staying to help you then win that fight that you're going to have to take into GOAT. So if you go, okay, we beat your quad DPS comp with our dive comp, you came back as GOATs and beat our dive comp, we're now going to come back as GOATs, but we can come back as GOATs with a Sombra that has EMP charged and win that next fight. So that can be pretty darn nice if your EMP happens to work out that way. That said, if you get your EMP and you need it to beat the heavy DPS comp, absolutely go for it. It's worth doing. The other comp that's really effective and pretty fast at taking down heavy DPS comps is a Widow Tracer Dive comp. You can substitute Sombra for Tracer if you really like, but I do prefer Tracer. What you're looking to do here is, with your tanks, a similar thing. You're looking to do those pressure jumps, take space. Yes, if someone just absolutely messes up, your tanks can, as a pair, go ahead and force a kill on them. But primarily, they're looking to take back space and push people away to increase their own Widow sight lines and decrease the opposing poke DPS's sight lines. Once you get enough map control like this, it's going to help tilt the battle in your Widow's favor, even though she's playing into multiple poke DPS, so she would lose a poke war. She's expected to lose peeking battles because there's potentially multiple snipers looking at her as well as other ranged DPS. But you actually take advantage of that by manipulating vision. So your Widow is a threat that absolutely demands that she's constantly being watched, that they're constantly ready for her to be peaked. And once your tanks have helped take space, once your Tracer, and Tracer is the best DPS for this, has shooed people away, Tracer does a fantastic job of moving people around. So Tracer can move the opponents out of flanks that she doesn't want them in, and she can also do a pretty good job of moving them into places where her Widow can potentially take a shot at them. That works out quite nicely. Your Tracer's in very little danger in doing so as long as she doesn't go absolutely wild with it. And that's going to set you up. Obviously, playing Widow into a comp that's light on tanks means she can one-shot so much of the opposing roster. Works out great for you. In terms of actually optimizing your play a bit, I will at some future point do a video specifically on Widow Tracer Dive because it is one of my favorite compositions and it is really deep and rich. But for this, some of the most basics of it are you can also heavily play the vision abuse. So you can do setups where you take over that map control, that flank control, and then your Tracer and your Winston can play specifically to attention bait. They can go, hey, I'm going to shoot at mid-range at your Widow to make her turn and look at me. Or I'm going to zap you and then I'm going to drop a bubble as Winston. I have no intention whatsoever of forcing a kill on you, but because I'm making you turn to look 90 degrees to the right, there's now 0.8 of a second that my Widow can peek during where you're not looking at her. Some number of your poke DPS aren't looking at her, so I've swung that poke battle, if not totally in her favor, at least much more so than was in her favor before. Combine that with Tracer doing the same thing, and you can line up some really nice things if your comms are good for vision calls that lead to her peeking with a very high success rate and very little risk to her. Your Zen, of course, takes advantage of those same peak windows, works out great. You've got very nice pickoff potential with your volleys and your mercy boosted Widow there. The downside to this one is it does not transition as well. You are going to need to swap probably your entire hero roster except Zen to get into the goats fight after they come back as goats and force you off. That's life. It's still okay. I do in general like this comp, particularly against the triple poke stuff that's been coming out recently, but either of these comps will work. So that's really what I wanted to share today. These are the two best comps I recommend for getting people off of quad DPS or triple poke comps very quickly. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Thanks, guys. Temporal out.